All right, very good. Once again, I'm Adam Dwalski, Chair of the Tautog Board. With staff's assistance, we will go through the board meeting today. Our first agenda item is to approve the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, is there any objection to the agenda as presented? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Our second item of business is to approve the proceedings from the November 2015 meeting. Are there any changes to those proceedings as presented? Seeing none, is there any objection to approving them as presented? Seeing none, those proceedings are approved. Our next order of business is public comment for those items that are not on the agenda. Is there any member of the public that would speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will continue on. Our next order of business is to get an update on Draft Amendment 1. Just as a summary, at the annual meeting, we had the motion to move to direct the PDT to develop draft amendment under option 3, which included the regions of Mass through Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, and option 4, which had the regions specified as Massachusetts to Rhode Island, Long Island Sound, including Connecticut and New York, New Jersey, excluding Long Island Sound, and Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. So we'll be able to go ahead and get an update on the work that the PDT has done. We'll have the opportunity today to provide some feedback and further direction on that. We'll also get an update on some of the ongoing stock assessment work for that Long Island Sound assessment and the New York, New Jersey assessment that would feed off that. And then we'll have discussion on the commercial harvest tagging program, which this board has a subcommittee of that will have a report for us as well today. So with that, I'll turn the presentation back to Ashton.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to present the PDT update for Draft Amendment 1. The PDT has met twice to discuss the plan of work and scope. And the PDT has also started writing certain portions of the FMP again, or revising or editing portions of it. The FMP is from 1996, so there's considerable updates that need to be done in the text that don't necessarily require a management decision, but just need to be updated, so that is ongoing. So just going through kind of what's inside Draft Amendment 1, there's regional management efforts, and as Adam just alluded to, we're kind of waiting for some stock assessments to be done for Long Island Sound and the New York, New Jersey stock assessments. So that's an awaiting pattern, but it's a very important component of Draft Amendment 1. We're also revising the FMP goals and objectives. This is under review by the PDT. So next, we're also including reference points and rebuilding timeframes. And this was specifically reviewed by the PDT in the 2 calls that we had last month and the month before. So draft language will be presented in this presentation. Management measures, this was also reviewed by the PDT, and it does require some additional guidance from the board and also finalized stock assessments, which I'll review in this presentation. Lastly, within Draft Amendment 1 is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing within the Tautog fishery. So as we know, there seems to be a black market in the fishery, and we're trying to address this. So the subcommittee, the law enforcement subcommittee met, and that presentation will be presented separate of this one by Mark. So I just kind of want to dive into exactly the language that we're considering. I know this is a lot of words on one slide, but when we reviewed the FMP, we realized that there was no specific language on what is overfishing, what does overfished mean for this species. So we just kind of took very generic language, and to really sum up what this is saying is, for overfishing, if overfishing is occurring in this fishery, then the board will take steps to reduce F to the target level according to the F reduction schedule identified in the next slide. If current F exceeds the target but is below the threshold, the board should consider steps to reduce F to the target level. So that's just kind of putting that in writing within this FMP. Next, we'll move to this. These are kind of more items that we were looking for board guidance on. So if the fishery if overfishing is occurring in the fishery, then there should be steps to reduce it. So the PDT discussed the timeline to eliminate overfishing, and they came to the following. The board shall reduce F to a level that is at or below the target within a maximum of 3 years. So there's many, as you know, many different time frames that we could have looked at. There could have been the next year. It could have been spread into 2 years. The PDT felt that a maximum of 3 years, so reducing the harvest within a 3-year time frame, was the most appropriate. However, we looked to the board for guidance on this. So for the probability of achieving F target, the board will use an X percentage for probability of achieving F target in 3 years. So the PDT discussed a 50% or a 70% probability of reducing F to the target within a 3-year time frame. However, we could not come to a consensus on a specific probability. Jason did look at certain South Atlantic species. He found that it was common for groupers, which are similar to Tautog, to have a 50% probability of achieving F target. However, we also found some groundfish stocks have a 75% probability. The PDT was not considering the 75%, only going as high as a 70% probability. However, we do need to look to the board to see what is your level of risk when managing this species and what do they feel is most appropriate probability. So that's the overfishing part. So then we moved into the overfished. And similar to overfishing, we just defined what it means for the stock to be overfished. And if it is overfished, then it says the board will take steps to increase spawning stock biomass to the target level according to the rebuilding schedule, which will be on the next slide. Then it just says the board should consider steps to increase as a speed to the target level if below. And so once again, this was not in the current FMP that we had. So for the stock rebuilding schedule, so the PDT discussed this, and they felt that when the stock is overfished, meaning below the spawning stock threshold, the board will take efforts to rebuild the stock to SSB target within a 10-year time frame. So we could have picked any number of years. Of course, 10 years is the standard. And we also felt that given the slow growth rate of the species, that a 10-year time frame seemed most appropriate. But this is also something that we want the board to consider and provide guidance on if they think that this time frame is appropriate. So next, we were thinking about the main focus of this amendment, which is regional management. So within a region, the board can select to manage recreational and commercial fisheries using a regional standard, meaning within that region, if it's the Delmarva region, everyone would succumb to a certain management measure, and everyone would do the exact same thing, whether it's bag limits, seasonal closures, or minimum size. Or, and we did take this out to public comment in the scoping period, or there could be conservation equivalency, meaning that states could, there is an F reduction for that region, and then states could decide together, or meaning separately, how they would like to reduce it and reach the F target. I did want to note that for the conservation equivalency, there may not be enough data at the state level to kind of parse out how to do that for conservation equivalency, but it's still a method that you guys could consider. We're not saying that it has to be considered or defined or decided today as to whether each region should be a regional standard or have conservation equivalency. We just want to bring it forward as something that needs to be decided eventually. And then we also specifically note that, as an example, at this time the PDT recommends a 16-inch minimum size limit for the recreational and commercial fishery within each region. Now this is up for discussion, but this was kind of something that we initially saw as something that should be a regional standard within each region. So a 16-inch minimal size for recreational and commercial fisheries, but still up for debate. So coming full circle on everything that we've kind of discussed, we're still in the very preliminary stages of reviewing the draft amendment and kind of coming up with language, and we do still need guidance. So I just kind of wanted to summarize specific areas where we were looking for guidance today, and that is the time frame in which to reduce F, also the probability of achieving F target, and also the stock rebuilding time frame. And lastly, the management within each region, should it be a regional standard or conservation equivalency? This last one is more something that you guys should consider. However, it doesn't have to be decided today because we still would need finalized stock assessments for the PDT and the TC to develop specific management measures moving forward. So with that, I'll take questions.
So let me just add that the majority of what was discussed here is in the supplemental materials and printed out on the back table. There's a nice 7-page document labeled a decision document. As Ashton indicated, a lot of it's just highlighting areas for feedback, not necessarily specific A or B type decisions that are required right now, although they certainly will come to that at some point in time. So that is in your materials for further reference. It pretty much highlights everything. So with that, are there any specific questions for the presentation? And then we can get into discussion about these items if there's no specific questions. Okay, seeing no hands for questions, we can get into discussion on these. Hopefully, with where we are with things today, are not at a place where specific motions would be needed. If we can come to a consensus as a board, again, the intent here is to just give the PDT some direction as they move forward. And with that, I'll turn it to the board for discussion. Or not. Dan.
Thank you. I might have a question for Katie to back up a little bit, if you don't mind. One of the themes that came out of our last meeting was a perception by the law enforcement community and the fishery managers that there may be more non-compliance with this species than any other that we deal with. And if we make a concerted effort to reduce that through commercial fish tagging or through, in my state, we intend to work on an initiative to increase fines. If we solve that, how does that get, how can that be measured in terms of the probability of achieving F? In other words, if we're going to solve a lot of the illegal harvest, how will that be revealed or manifested in our ability to achieve F?
So ideally, what would happen is those fish are no longer being removed. They would be part of the population, and so they would contribute to the indices. They would be able to contribute to legal catch and would be registered as legal catch. And in theory, that would improve the health of the population, and that would show up in the stock assessment as you have reduced you've brought down F, your population is increasing, and so things are going well. So the assessment doesn't really care where those reductions come from or how that happens. It just looks to the data to make sure that the population is responding positively. So to that extent, when we do this process, we probably won't know whether or not it's the cuts that we took that worked or whether it's the reduction in this unknown illegal harvest that happens. So because we can't quantify that illegal harvest, we can't really incorporate that into the projections in terms of so that'll be one of the assumptions in the projections, is that the harvest that's going to happen is known. And so we won't have a way to quantify that uncertainty. That, I think, is actually more of an area where the board would want to consider it in a qualitative way to say we would accept maybe we need a higher probability of not overfishing with legal harvest because we're uncomfortable with the potential for unreported harvest to impact the stock. So I think that's more of it's not something we can really quantify at this stage, and it would come down to more of a qualitative risk assessment from the board, I feel.
Follow up? So the periodicity of the assessments, would we, if we chose, let's say, a 50% probability of achieving F based on, MRIP data, then we may be forced to take a more conservative approach than is necessary if we are simultaneously reducing poaching and improving compliance. So therefore, we might want to have a lower probability of achieving F if we're working really hard on that other side.
Right, and that's I think something for the board's consideration too. If you feel like this is going to have a positive effect on your fishery and you will achieve some kind of reduction in harvest that's not reported, then you can go with a lower probability on that basis. So, but again, it's not something that we can quantify at this point.
Got Pat Augustine, Dave Simpson, and then Russ Allen.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good job, Ashton. Thank you kindly. Question arises because I viewed this chart on section 4.1.1, page 6. I do notice that New Jersey and Delaware show a 15-inch minimum under recreational and 15-inch. Is that primarily because of the Delaware Bay situation? That's one question. A follow-on would be New York is at 16, and New York and New Jersey waters combine on the South Shore, and they literally fish on the same body of fish, and will we not have a problem there? So I guess first question, why 15? Is that because of Delaware Bay, or is there the rationale that built up in what the size has been in past years?
So the current size limits are a function of the last management action that the board took, and each state was required to take a reduction, and these were the size limits that were thus approved by the board to achieve those reductions. Dave Simpson?
Yep, thanks. Yeah, all these recommendations make sense in, sort of the for your standard fish and stock assessment and species that we have more confidence in, and I like to include summer flounder in that, but what we've been going through there. So even one of the better assessments on the coast can take you for a little bit of a roller coaster ride. Tautog, I don't have nearly that kind of faith in our ability to assess the stock. For one thing, reference to it being predominantly a recreational fishery. There are very large magnitude heaves in estimates from one year to the next, and if I recall from the assessment correctly, the estimate of mortality, or F, is based on a 3 or 4 year period in the life history of a fish that lives 20 or 30 years. So, I mean, that just speaks to the uncertainty in the assessment, that you take the slope for mortality, and the only place that you can get a plausible, negative slope that's in the realm of what you think it might be. There aren't 20-year-old fish in there. There aren't 5-year-old or 6-year-old fish in there. There's a tremendous amount of variability in the growth rate of Tautog, such that a length at age key looks rather mushy, and so the age structure is quite mushy. So I'm just anxious about taking standard approaches to management that are on this species when I'm skeptical the assessment can support it. And in particular, yeah, I gravitate to the natural default response is 50% probability. That's was determined by court order for summer flounder. You have to have at least a 50% chance of success, or you're not, credible. At the same time, I hesitate to go out to the public and say, well, we're going to take a 25% chance of getting it, of not overfishing on Tautog, when my real question is, given all this uncertainty, both the quantifiable uncertainty and the unquantifiable, would we force ourselves into such a conservative management regime with this that we're going to really forego a lot of fishing opportunity? So I wish I had an answer, but those are my concerns with this species, that we're maybe expecting too much from the assessments.
So these items are here because they're not presently in the FMP. Let me turn to staff for a moment and get clarification, or from the PDT, with regards to, are they now mandated by subsequent policy since the original FMP was put in place, that these definitions now exist the way they are, or it's to the discretion of the board what to include in the FMP?
I would say it's to the discretion of the board. Since this is not a federally managed species, it's not held to the 50% probability as said in Magnuson-Stevens. So when we include the overfishing and the overfish definitions, it's merely just to provide accountability for how we manage this fishery, and so it's not so vague.
So to set the stage, again, the PDT, in doing what we directed them to do, looked at other FMPs and said, these are items that are not there, here's some suggestions. They're doing their job facilitating that discussion, and I think you bring up some very good points. But there's no requirement that these be there, or with the definitions that you see in front of you. Next up, I had Russ Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not as uncomfortable as Dave is with some of these issues. I think the F-level time frame and as well as the SSB time frame are semi-realistic. So, and I know we need things in the plan such as this to make sure that we do what we need to do. As far as the other two issues, I think maybe it's something that should go out in the amendment as for public comment, and whether or not we should have a 50% or 70% probability. I'm not sure how that would work out, but I know it has to be at least 50%, and you know, that's what you guys came up with, so that's fine with me. And I know on the management within a region, this was an issue that was brought up at our PID public hearing. If we are in a region with other states, we fish on different stocks depending on which of those regions we end up in. So it doesn't make sense to have the same exact regulations for each of those states. So, you know, we'd like to have that option of conservation equivalency within a region. Now, whether or not that goes into plan that way or whether it goes out for public comment that way, I know we would have public comment that would be contrary to having a regional standard. Thank you.
So on those comments, again, there's no specific need for these definitions in there, or no need for at least on any percentages. Again, it's at the discretion of the board how they want to proceed. If there was no further direction given by the board to the PDT today, I would expect that when we get the draft amendment back, these are the types of things we would see in it as recommended options. Would that be correct?
Yes. These will come back if they're not decided today to the board.
And again, it's not a function of a decision, just more guidance that we'd want to direct them with. Mike Luisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the first issue, I'm happy to see that there's a consideration for a time period that's more than just 1 year. I think we may have all learned from some experience with striped bass that a 1 year time period to return F to the target can be thought of as just a little too drastic. So I'm happy to see that there's a consideration for multi-year reductions over a phased-in period. But I will make a point to that issue that what I've learned from the experience of having dealt with the striped bass fishery and the reductions that we had to take was that the public, the anglers, had it was, you know, their expectation when you set a period of time is that once that period of time is exceeded, or you get through the 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years, that everything will return to normal and you'll be back to the point where you were prior to having taken the reductions that were needed. And so what I would recommend is, if you're looking for some opinions on these issues, is that you take a little time in this draft to explain a little more thoroughly what this time period means, and that further evaluations of the stock will lead to additional management action, rather than after a 3-year period is over and we are at the target level, that everything goes back to the way it once was. And that may help manage some expectations of our stakeholders. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm not hearing much in further direction. I did have Tom Foti.
My concern is we get into these holes with species that we're not going to spend any more money to get any better research than we have. With all the constraints that are on state budgets right now, and every one of the states doesn't have a dime, especially New Jersey floating around, that we're not going to get any better science done on Tautog that I can see in the next couple of years. So, you know, I wind up with species like black sea bass. We've had the same bad science since 1994, scub, or a few other species. Now, we tried to put some money into Tautog over the years. We did some studies, but it was never enough. And again, the regionalization of this fishery is a lot different from sea bass. It's a lot different. I mean, when Pat says we have the same Tautog all along the South Shore into New Jersey, that's not really the truth. I mean, you have certain areas that combine fish, like probably, you know, Long Beach and on Long Island until Belmar in New Jersey. They probably fish because they fish that New York Bight area. But you get away from that, Shinnecock has a different stock, and Long Island Sound we know is completely different from the others. So it makes it difficult. So with the mortality rate in one area might be totally different. And since this species, unlike striped bass, doesn't run up and down the coast, or summer flounder, that it's not going to be as easy to do that, and we're not going to be able to tweak those numbers for the mortality of, say, the stock off Delaware Bay is doing up fine, but we're not going to be able to prove that because we don't have the science to do that. And then we're going to be in this hole saying that we have to assume, and I'm not too happy doing that. So that's my grave concerns over when we set goals that we have no money to do the science to basically reinforce those goals and wind up with bad science.
Okay, so where that leaves us, unless someone makes the suggestion and we can get some consensus to change the time frames here, remove one of these items, add something, the PDT would work towards a document that would include these items, would include both the 50 and 75% probabilities. That's what's in the draft decision document. Right now, you've got X% on the board, but they do have those two numbers that they're contemplating. So that would be where we would leave things at this point, and that's where the PDT would continue doing their work. I had Pat and then Dave.
Now, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I assume then we budgeted for the activities in this document that have to be completed. True? And if it's true, then we're going to set a timeline as to we further develop it and what will be the next step. So then we get some answers on that, and I think we ought to move forward from there.
Well, I think in terms of budgeting, the development of the draft amendment is there. It's part of the work plan, and this is just part of the PDT's work that they need to do moving forward. So there, as terms of what we direct them to do, it's not a budget question right now. Dave?
Yeah, thank you. So regarding the first one, the time frame, currently our practice is to, we receive an assessment, we take a management action, and we revisit how we did the next time there's a stock assessment. And so it occurs to me that it would be important to know the expected interval between stock assessments for Tautog, and that should be related to the interval or the time frame to reach the target. In other words, if there isn't going to be an assessment but every 6 years, then we should be thinking maybe of broadening our time to target, because we won't be able to evaluate it but every 6 years. So that kind of concept. And then I was wondering, Katie, on the probability, I'm trying to figure out what information you could provide us to help us get a better feel for what it means to get back to a target within, say, 3 years, given the uncertainty around the F estimate. What does that look like, and maybe compared to a couple other species that we're maybe have a higher level of confidence in and we're more familiar with? Is that a reasonable thing to ask? I think I'm hoping to find a comfort level or an understanding of what we're buying before we buy it.
So, right, so in terms of, you mean comparing to other species, what levels do we use in other species, or what, like, relative uncertainty?
Yeah, the breadth of right, the width of the probability curve.
So I don't have that information off the top of my head. Obviously, for Tautog, it is going to be bigger because I think there is more uncertainty in terms of the levels of catch, definitely, that are going into affecting to drive these F estimates. I think when we do the projections, there would be more. We would put more uncertainty into the catch estimates as part of the projections, understanding that the MRIP values are more uncertain for Tautog than they are for some of our more commonly encountered recreational species. So that would probably increase the range of basically potential outcomes that you would see from the projections. So with the projections, the sources of our uncertainty are kind of that the amount of catch that we're taking out every year, the amount of recruitment that we're going to see every year, the amount of growth that we're going to see every year, as well as sort of the uncertainty in the starting point of those projections. So we start at some point and there's uncertainty around that, and we project it forward and there's uncertainty around that. If we're doing short-term projections, so 3 years or so, I think the recruitment has less of an effect on that for Tautog than it would for some of our cyanid species that recruit very quickly into the fishery. But on the other hand, again, the estimates of catch and the estimates of where we start out are more uncertain. So I don't have a good way of representing what that uncertainty is going to be like in the projections in terms of, I think the concern would be, are we going to have to be more conservative with Tautog just because to get to a 50% probability of reducing F to that target, you need to take a more substantial cut than you would if you had a more confidence in some of these. And I think we don't really know until we see how those projections are going to play out in terms of what's the most important source of uncertainty in the final short-term outcome.
Tony?
Just to follow up on the first half of your question or statement, Dave, I think there are some plans out there, and not to say this is right or wrong, but there are plans out there that say you have to reduce F within 1 year. And you don't necessarily do a stock assessment after that year, but you set your regulations perceiving that it would reduce within 1 year. Whether or not that's good that you've set a set of regulations that you can't check right away is up to the board on how quickly they want to know the results of those management actions.
Go ahead, follow up.
Yeah, so how we've managed Tautog so far is to say we have an assessment, we need to reduce mortality by 23%. We take an action that we believe will accomplish that, just kind of not in a deterministic sense, not in any kind of stochastic sense. We cut landings by 23%, we're done. And we'll see how we did at the next assessment. This is more, having to take into account the uncertainty in all these estimates and, the probability of achieving that target in 3 years takes into account all kinds of uncertainty. And if your F estimate is very tight and narrow, you feel confident, and it probably doesn't take too conservative an action to get what you expect. But I'm afraid with Tautog, we'll find out after we sort of buy the horse that the variability looks like this, and so we have to get all the way down here on our landings to have a 50% probability of achieving a target within the specified time frame. So if there's a way to kind of show us what that would look like, how painful it is to be how risk averse, I think it would really be helpful to the public and to us.
So I do think that question of pain is going to be dependent on some other decisions that we'll ultimately make. And I think seeing the level of feedback at this point, it would be helpful to move into the updates of the Long Island Sound and the New York, New Jersey assessments. We've got a couple of slides that will address some options for moving forward with regards to which data sets we can use, 2013, or integrating some more recent data into these as well, that may help guide that discussion. So let me move forward with those discussions. I'll turn back to Ashton, and I know Dave and Russell help inform that.
Okay, I was actually going to move to have Dave and Russ provide updates, and then I was going to show that the timeline that we propose. I just want to make sure they're in line.
Go ahead, Dave.
All right, yeah, as some of you know, we hit a little bump in the road with losing our postdoc at UConn, who took a job with DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, where she, resides. But we have moved very quickly, the University of Connecticut has, to bring on a doctoral student. His name is Jacob Casper. He's already on staff. We're going to meet with our staff, probably 3 of us, our commercial statistics people, recreational statistics people, and the principals involved in the assessment in this Sea Grant project. That's how this is being funded. Dr. Eric Schultz and Dr. Jason Vacoon. So we're going to get together next week and schedule frequent meetings to accelerate the pace of progress on this and to make sure that we keep a vigorous pace on development of this, so that we don't interrupt the time frame that we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, just to follow up on Dave's conversation, he hit most of the points pretty well. Jeff Bruss from our office has been in contact with Jacob and is working with him, and has also been in touch with Tom Sminkney from NOAA on the MRIP data, and is working hard to get that data to make sure Jacob is in good shape to get the Long Island Sound issue underway. And as he's going through that data, he should be able to pull out the New Jersey, New York data, which would help Jeff. And my conversation with Jeff yesterday was he's definitely on target for August, even with this little hiccup, and that was our original plan anyway. So no way that they would have this by May, but there's definitely from Jeff's point of view, looking good for the August meeting. So at least some sort of preliminary estimates that he would have.
Okay, so that brings us to this slide, and I'll let Ashton run through it.
Okay, so as Russ just mentioned, we still are on target for the August board preview of the Long Island Sound and New York, New Jersey stock assessments. And so then I just wanted to expand the process beyond the August meeting. So then that means that then the TC would do a catch reduction analysis, determine specific management measures, and the PDT would further develop the management measures. A full draft amendment would be proposed at the November meeting, and then in the winter time, this would go out for public comment, and then the board could review draft amendment 1 at the February 2016 meeting, so in 1 year. So one thing to note about that is that this data would include data through 2013, because that's what the latest stock assessment did. And the New York, New Jersey, Long Island Sound stock assessments, there, of course, have the ability to use more current data. However, then, since it's a 4-region approach, that means that 2 regions would have more current data, and then 2 regions that were previously done would only have data up until 2013. So that's something to consider. And with that in mind, I talked to Katie, I talked to Jason. However, we have not fully discussed this with the TC, but I did want to present another timeline that would incorporate data through 2015 for all management regions on the next slide. And so once again, so we still have to kind of review this with the TC, but the initial thinking is that, and the new items are highlighted in blue, is that the board could potentially task the TC with incorporating 2015 data and do a full stock assessment update. So therefore, we're not making management measures that would be implemented in 2017 based on 2013 data. We would be able to update it to 2015. So this would kind of delay the entire process by 1 board meeting projected. So then the final draft amendment would come to review at the May 2017 meeting. And yes, so it's just a little bit different. The one catch when talking with Katie was that we haven't checked in with the TC about the availability of age data, so that could be the only process that might delay this process to get 2015 data, but we'll check with them right after this meeting to see if it's possible. I just wanted to present a different timeline as well.
So one question I had with this is, how would that work as far as the commission's work plan and availability for doing that stock assessment update in that March to October timeline?
We would have to run it by the policy board in order to approve the update for Tautog, and the ASC will be meeting this March, and then the policy board will be looking at a revised schedule for all assessments, and so for that side of things, we would know that the policy board approved that in May. In terms of budgeting, we haven't fully discussed with staff what the needs would be in terms of would it be in-person meetings, not in-person meetings, but I think if we were conservative about the number of in-person meetings we had, we could make this work.
Is it something that would need to be tasked at this meeting, or you could have those discussions and the board could then task the TC with that at the May meeting?
I think it's fine to do it at the May meeting because we'll continue to work on the tasks that we need to do to populate the draft on other issues, and then this wouldn't impact that either way, either decision. We would continue to be able to move forward.
Yeah, I would, the data availability probably wouldn't be until May anyway in terms of states finalizing their age data, survey data, MRIP data anyway, so it's not like we could start now. So we could wait and get, I guess, consensus from the policy board about this as a use of the TC's time and effort in May, and that would not hinder this timeline.
Okay, so that's what the discussion point would be potentially in May, is whether we want to take a management action in early 2017 with data through 2013, or whether we'd want to do that update and have the data be consistent across whatever regions we move forward with data that included 2014 and 2015. So again, at this point, I would turn it back to the board. Is there anything specific, a specific question the PDT would need an answer on today, or they would be able to continue moving forward with the development of the amendment?
We can continue moving forward with the development of the amendment. There is still a lot to do. We just can't move forward with developing clearly specific management actions until the stock assessments have been completed. So we can do all other areas, but as far as, what are the bag limits, season limits, we cannot move forward with that until stock assessments are completed.
Dave.
Sorry, so the issue of in 2016 doing the stock assessment, do we ask UConn to use data only through 2013, or I mean, I hate to ignore data that we have in hand, or do we use 2014, which is what they've been asking for recently, is the more up-to-date data. I hate to come out in 2016 with a 3-year-old data.
Tom Foti?
We always get knocked for having, when we're doing a plan and going out to public hearings, that the data is too old, it's not showing what's happening right now. I would actually look at postponing it to the May, so we actually have data up to 2015. I think that's a smart way. And I think we should be doing that for other, since we're going to go out and since it's going to be big, we might as well do it right. But you start showing up with data from 2013, people say, that's not what's going on now. Maybe we corrected a lot of the illegal fishery, hopefully by the next year or two, and I don't know. I think the closest to it, when we're putting the plan out, the data we have, the better it looks.
So what we would have is, at the May meeting, we'd meet again, hear some more about the ongoing work on those assessments. We'd have to make the decision about whether to task the TC with doing that update using the updated data. Would there be the opportunity, Dave, you had some very specific questions and some suggestions about how to help evaluate those rebuilding timelines. Is that something that the PDT could provide some feedback with some input from Dave specifically what he's looking for?
I mean, to be honest, it sounds like you would want to know what the catch reductions would be if we accepted a 50% versus a 70% threshold, and we won't know that until we do the actual reductions. And so and we wouldn't know what that would be until we know the targets and the regions and everything like that. So we could do it potentially on the coast as an example if it's really important for you to know this. But I think the alternative would be if you could have those as the options and see those results once we finally decide on a target and a threshold and a region, and the level and the current assessment that you want to use those data from. Once you make those decisions, we could do those calculations and show you both the catch that would give you a 50% and the catch that would give you a 70%, along with your other bag and size limit analyses. But in terms of getting that done by May, I don't think so. Not in a meaningful way.
Dave?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't ask you to do this for every assessment that's out there. I was thinking in terms of maybe one example and what's the variance around the F estimate from, a typical assessment of the several that were done on the coast, and how does that compare with, say, summer flounder or one of the better assessments, just to get a little bit of, understanding of how much different it might be to manage Tautog under a set of rules that currently applies to another species we're more familiar with, but we have higher confidence level in.
And we could certainly do essentially a literature review of what is already out there and present some of these numbers in that context.
I think that's about the best we're going to get, Dave. Okay. So, seeing no other hands, that's where we're at in the development of the amendment here right now, and then we'll look forward to that decision on whether to task the TC with that update at the May meeting. So that brings us to the next issue as part of the amendment with regards to reviewing of commercial tagging program objectives and the ongoing work of the law enforcement subcommittee. They do have a full report again in the supplemental materials, but we've got Mark Robson here today to provide a presentation on that work as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, as he mentioned, go to this second slide here. We provided a report, a subcommittee report, November of 2015, and received some direction from you all to develop some specific objectives for a tagging program for Tautog, and also in making sure that we explore tagging systems that would also be applicable to the live fish market as well as the regular commercial harvest. And the subcommittee is made up of three members of this board and 3 members of the law enforcement committee. And we met via phone conference on January 12th. And as the chairman has indicated, you have a written summary of that meeting in your materials. We spent a good bit of time initially during the conference call sort of calibrating our information and discussing what we all knew about the fishery and the circumstances behind the harvest of both live and dead fish, and more or less framed out a basic goal statement that we perceive to be important in determining the objectives of a commercial harvest tagging program. And the goals basically needed to address adequate accountability of a system, mechanism that would ensure minimizing the perceived illegal or unreported or unregulated fishing that was going on in this particular case. We also felt it was important to develop a tagging system that could be easily used and accepted by the fishing community. We also wanted to make sure that the tags or tagging system would potentially have a neutral effect on the marketability of those fish, particularly in the live market. And we also want to make sure that as a goal we developed objectives that provided for an effective enforcement program in conjunction with the tagging of Tautog. So, and again, working on the direction that you provided to the subcommittee, we came up with 4 draft objectives for the commercial tagging program. First, of course, we want a verifiable system that does address enforcement needs. So for the officers that are out there trying to track down where some of these live fish markets are or where fish are coming from or going to, the tagging system would need to be set up in a way that can deal with that, particularly cross-state type activities. And because there is a perceived cross-state activity in terms of where fish are harvested versus where they're marketed, we want to make sure that the tagging system is standardized among all the states. And another objective is to make sure that the tag design and the make and the type of tag that's used is adequate for enforcement and tracking purposes. So this would imply things like the durability of the tag, tamper-proof issues, and so forth. And as a final objective, we wanted to try to find a tagging system that ideally could be used for both live and dead fish. In talking about the fishery itself, we wound up discussing a lot of important points about tags themselves and the tagging system. Certainly we feel like we want to be able to identify where fish are harvested from by state, so there was a consensus around some sort of color coding system to identify individual states. We want all of the tags to be, that are used by the states, to be consistent in terms of what's on them. So at a minimum, they need to have a standardized identifier for year, the state they're coming from, and if they're color coded, that would serve that purpose. And then some uniform tag number system that all the states could agree to. We want tags that are tamper-proof and single use. We also felt it was important to have a system for returning unused tags. This would probably help in terms of management of harvest and quotas if there are quotas in place. And it's also, from an enforcement perspective, good to have a way of getting unused tags out of the system and off the water, if you will. And again, we wanted to have a tag system that was usable both for live and dead fish. And of course, having tags that can be applied to live fish and then kept on those fish for a good bit of time is certainly a unique challenge for this fishery. And getting back to the ease of a system for use by fishermen, the tags need to be easy to attach, they need to be secure, and of course we hope for an economical tagging system for the states to apply. And as with the live fish market and live fish being tagged, we hopefully would have a type of tag that has a minimal impact on fish marketability and appearance. Some components that we talked about with regard to the fishery in general, and it was certainly recognized, I think, by the subcommittee that this tends to be a more diffuse and decentralized fishery than some of the other ones that we deal with that have a tagging program in place. We recognize that not all the states are consistent in how the fishery is regulated. So, for example, we have a few states that do have a limited access type program where you have permitted commercial harvesters. Other states have a more open fishery. And it was certainly recognized that there is an amount of illegal harvests going on by fishermen who do not have commercial permits. And the last point, of course, that's important, and we had quite a bit of discussion around the issue of a tagging system and whether you can have the tags applied to the fish at point of harvest or point of sale. And somewhat of a dilemma. Typically, from an enforcement perspective, the sooner those tags can be applied to a harvested fish, the better. So you would want a point of harvest system. However, when you're looking at a state that may have an open fishery, getting tags in the hands of all of the fishermen who might be out there that would need to apply those tags at the point of harvest becomes more problematic. It's not so much a problem if it's a point of, for a point of harvest if you have a regulated fishery with a limited number of permitted fishermen. But obviously, how the fishery is prosecuted, whether it's access open or access closed, affects whether you can really realistically expect tags to be put on the fish at the point of harvest versus the point of sale. And that's an important consideration in the program. So at the end of our meeting, we tried to summarize what we believe are some issues that we would like to get further board consideration or guidance from. And these are really questions for the board. And they are, first of all, we expressed a strong desire, particularly members of this board, to try to make sure we consult with commercial experts on tagging and tag programs, whether it's manufacturers, commercial fishermen, fish market folks. We want to try to make sure we reach out and consult with them on the best way to develop a tagging program and not work in a vacuum there. And another question is, are there specific tag vendors that you as state representatives may know about who we can talk to or that we can review? And also, are there states that would be available to step up and maybe help test some of these tag prototypes, especially for live Tautog, where you have some pretty unique requirements? And also, does the board have a preference for whether to continue to have a mixed fishery where some states are limited entry versus an open fishery? If you move towards a limited entry type fishery, that might allow a more serious consideration of point of harvest attachment of tags. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Great. So before we go to questions, let me touch on a couple of these items here and some things that are in progress with them. With regards to the first item, staff drafted a one-page memo that went out already to advisory panel members. It is the last page of the supplementary materials. I would encourage states who know of commercial fishermen with whom should be consulted or believe that we could get some usable feedback with on the commercial tagging program to make sure that they have that document and to encourage them to give feedback to staff with the contact info contained therein. With regards to the second item, there were a couple of potential tags that again are highlighted in the Law Enforcement Subcommittee meeting summary. The state of New York is looking to doing some trials when the spring fishery opens April and May. That's going to be highly dependent on water temperature and activity of those fish. I think there would be the desire for other states that are willing to participate in a trial program to do so and to let us know about your willingness and availability to participate today, or if not today, in the not too distant future. With that, I'll turn it to the board for specific questions for Mark first, and then we can have discussion about these items. Also, there were the 4 objectives that were listed. We can go back to those. There was kind of an overview of them in the presentation. They are listed in detail in the meeting material. So any questions first? Okay, seeing no question? Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious as to whether, as part of the research that went into this, there are any other live fish that tags are being used on right now that have been used successfully in the type of project that is being envisioned here.
Mark?
Yes, there was some discussion about tags, and I think Ashton may have more information about those too, but it seemed as if they were primarily tags designed for either farm-raised or aquaculture fish. I don't know if we knew of any specific live harvested fish that are being tagged at this time.
The belief was it was a pretty unique situation with what we were looking at here. Go ahead, Mark.
And just as another point on that, part of the consideration, I mean, obviously there's game fish tags that are applied to certain kinds of fish. But the issue here is not only live fish, but these are live fish that can be apparently maintained in market situations for fairly lengthy times, up to several months is what we understand or more. So it has to be a tag that not only stays on a live fish, but doesn't hurt the fish over a long period of time.
Or impact the marketability as well. I had Tom Fody, then Roy Miller.
I'll leave mine to when you want comments on it.
Question, Roy?
Mr. Chairman, during the course of my long career, I ran into a lot of different types of tags, and I'm just sitting here pondering what possibly would fulfill all the requirements for this particular tag. Are there any at this point that anyone can share with us that might be amenable for these purposes? Thank you.
Well, again, there were two potential items that were listed here. One I know was brought forth by VIMS, as I recall, which was an item, and the other item that Steve Hines had brought forward that they intend to do the trials with this spring. John?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a suggestion, since I didn't realize they were going to keep these things alive so long. I mean, there's one supplier, of course, that we use for striped bass tags. A lot of the states do is Tide and Brooks, but obviously if you put a tag through the mouth and out the gills for a live fish, that's going to be a problem. But what about using like dart tags or T-bar tags, as we use in our tagging programs for live fish? And I know we've been looking into a volunteer tagging program similar to what Virginia does now. I think you could train people that are going to be tagging these things for live fish to put something like a dart tag on, which is a very simple application device, and it would probably have pretty good success of staying in the fish for a long time.
So the two specific vendors that the committee had was Pentair was the name of one, and Hall Print was the name of the other. And again, with regards to some of the tags that you suggested, the main concern is to avoid reusability of them. They need to be one-time tags that can't be applied at the point of harvest, delivered for sale, and then the fish is sold, and then that tag make its way back into the field again for potential reuse. So it's a unique situation, and any other suggestions that you have, we're all open to, and that's why we're bringing this information forward.
If I could just follow up, Mr. Chair, I was going to say Hall Print, which is in here already, makes the T-bar and the dart tags, and they would not be reusable. I mean, once you pull them out of the fish, they're usually not going to be able to be attached again. Floyd Tag also makes a very similar tag to Hall Print, but this does seem to be, a very different tagging situation from any of our other commercially landed fish situations. If you're trying to keep a fish alive for months and have a tag that's not going to affect its survival.
Mike Luisi, you had a question? Did you have your hand up, Tony? No? Passing also. All right, so let's move on to comments. I had Tom, and then I'll come back to Mike.
I went to my first tagging workshop, I think up in Woods Hole in 1986, when they said recreational people shouldn't tag fish. Some of the state directors, and NIPS was trying to get us all into tagging fish. The club I belonged to, Berkeley Striper Club, basically started tagging fish in '85, and we continually do that and put records into the Division of Fish and Wildlife. They've used it year over year. We keep meticulous records, because when they started, I said they had to do that, otherwise it wouldn't support a tagging program. They've done it over the last 25 years. These are all catch and release fish that basically swim around for tags. We get returns. We know what the returns are. We've experimented with a bunch of tags over the years. Some work better. Some we get further down the road. They last. They don't impede the fish. There's certain tags I do not like because they get algae growth and they do affect the way the fish swim. So I can basically work on that. But you need to do it at the point of harvest. If you do it at the point of harvest, you eliminate a lot of the problems. Just an example with what we did with this year with the bonus tag program in New Jersey. You had to tag the fish, it had to be tagged immediately. And if you caught with a fish that wasn't tagged immediately, you got a ticket. No ifs, ands, or buts. You had to pay for the tag. And the tags are all numbered, so you knew exactly how. And I don't see a problem with basically open fisheries or limited entry fisheries. The person buys the tags. You want to fish for tautog commercially, you go to one location, whether it's the division headquarters or someplace else, and you basically buy 50 tags. And every time you catch more than 50 fish, then you have to come back and buy tags. It keeps you able to manage your fisheries and how many tags go out, but it doesn't have to be done for limited entry. It could be done on an open fishery just the same. They just say if they are going to sell a fish legally, they need a tag, and they got to come down someplace and buy those tags. And you keep the records of how many tags you purchase in a bundle. That's how we do with the recreational tags. Every bundle that's put out, we know all the numbers, we record who buys the tags and gives us them out. And the same thing with the trophy tag program this year in New Jersey. Every tag had a number, you're only allowed one tag, or the party boats were allowed other. But they came on a boat and they didn't have the tags sooner. If they were on a boat, like one of the party or charter boats that were using the tags and basically didn't have the tags in the mouth immediately, the person got a warning and then got a fast ticket if we knew that he was trying to get away with it. So there's ways of doing it, but it's really got to be point of harvest, not point of sale. And because you can record immediately what tag numbers are, and you got to call on those numbers that you used. I mean, it's a little data, but if you want to stop the illegal fishery on this fishery that is really dramatically increased over the years, and it makes up a large mortality rate, I think, on this fishery, it's one way of doing it. And so it's the cost of doing business. And when they're selling these fish for $14 a pound or whatever they get on the live fish market, a $3 tag ain't going to make much of a difference to them. And that's the way, it's a part of the expense of doing business like we all do businesses.
Mike Luisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So over the years, I've had to deal with tags in our state. Again, the common thread with Maryland has to deal with striped bass. And I guess my recommendation on this, on these issues, for some consideration is that I think what it really boils down to, and in the experiences that we've had in our commercial tagging program in Maryland, is that unless the accountability portion of the system is locked tight, there will be, fishermen will find a way to get around the accountability measures unless they're really tight, and what you'll end up with is even a stronger black market than what you currently have, because the tags become so valuable that unless you account for them after the season's over and you have an audit process that you can really say that every single tag that wasn't used, it was returned, you know, it opens the door for a lot of misuse. And you know, for tautog, this isn't going to make any difference for us. We have a 5 fish per day limit on the commercial end. That's, you know, it's not going to matter. But for states that have a large fishery and maybe have hundreds of fishermen who have an ability to land tautog on any given day, you know, running a derby fishery with tagging and the need to have tags in your possession as a fisherman in order to be compliant with the rules in an open derby system that doesn't have a tight accountability system will ultimately lead to trouble. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Dan McKiernan.
Thank you. Just a follow-up to Tom Fode's comments. One of the things that we talked about in the committee was that we needed to make sure that the tag was not likely counterfeitable. So if the tag is easily reproduced, then as Mike Luisi said, that's going to become the coin of the realm. Having participated in the group, I was not aware that we only had 3 states with state quotas, and I'm guessing that in order for this to succeed, and maybe for the plan to succeed after this addendum, we're probably going to see all states with quotas. Is that a safe assumption?
Not sure we've got anything in the amendment right now that would call for that. I'll turn to Tony.
I think part of the black market issue, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but in New York, there's recreational fishermen that sell to restaurants, which would be illegal, and so the recreational fishermen would no longer be able to do that because the commercial fishery would require tags. So that would be eliminating one portion of the black market that I've heard about. So I don't think it would require there to be a quota. The tagging system is trying to address several issues, so it's not necessary to have a quota to have tags.
I just bring it up because this group was really using the striped bass model, and striped bass has state-by-state quotas. So it'll be interesting because in Massachusetts with our striped bass tags, and I'm sure everybody else's, we issue a number of tags which is commensurate or close to what we think is going to be the landings. And so I don't know how you would decide what that would be if you don't have a quota.
Dave, to that point?
Yeah, under Addendum 4, is that our current one? We had the reduction from some recent historical landings level. In effect, we have this de facto quota. You know, we had to move from an average of 100,000 pounds down to 70,000 pounds to achieve the percent reduction. So I kind of see that we have not an explicit, I call it a backdoor quota. You know, we cut from X to Y, you now have a limit, it's a quota, it's not explicit, but our intention would be to manage to that. We translate that into a number of fish based on an average weight, and we manage it as a quota.
So, Mark, maybe that's something we can bring back to the committee and further refine how states are working with that. The one table in the document listed quota for 3 states, but as Dave suggests, other states are doing something quota-based or fish-based, and that would be an issue that we could take up. I had Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the last item up there from the law enforcement report on limited entry versus an open fishery, I think it's fine if a state wants to have limited entry. I'm not familiar with any that do on the commercial fishery, but I know in the documentation it looked like a lot of seasonal closures, size limits have been raised. I mean, a lot has happened since 1998. I think that's when Amendment 1 sort of launched the series of reductions that we keep doing. So, you know, with 7 fisheries to monitor already, I hope that why that's there from law enforcement, Mark, is because there may have been conversations that would be an easier way perhaps to keep track of everyone. But in Virginia, it's such a small commercial fishery. So few are involved. I don't see numbers growing. And so I hope that, you know, if there are suggestions from anyone that limited entry is a good option, or even quotas, that, you know, that be sort of a voluntary situation as part of the mode of reductions. I know in Virginia, much to the chagrin of the harvesters, they always wanted seasons changed, to the point now where the big concern in Virginia is, and it may be other states too, I'm sure, what was a closed season and what was an open season probably are a little different in terms of abundance of fish. So what the harvesters tell us is, you know, we had those seasons which are open before because that's when the abundance was there. Now, that's not occurring. And of course, the tragedy there is, how is anyone going to figure out how you open a closed season without any data? But, you know, that's a reality. The second comment I had was also about the, you know, not being negative about it, but everyone has striped bass tags, and I don't know about the other states, but we do not get all the striped bass tags back, even though it's in a regulation that you have to turn in your striped bass tags. You have to realize that there are exceptions that are guiding everything, and What we do in Virginia is we make the harvester sign an affidavit as to why he doesn't have the rest of the tags. It's not an abundant amount of tags, but it does happen. And so what Mike Luisi was saying, that's just another wrinkle to any type of tagging system, because you do have to have some trust as far as why someone says they did not have their tags to turn back in. So thank you.
Okay, so let me just frame where we are here for a moment. We were fortunate to have the couple of boards before us kind of speed things along, gave us a little extra time. We've used that time and have now surpassed our scheduled end time at this point at the end of the day. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a show of hands for anybody else who wants to speak and give feedback on these items. And then I just want to go back to the objectives for the tagging program slide that we had up, just to see if we can get any feedback on those and kind of wrap things up from there. So right now I've got Russ and Mike. Is there anyone else that wants to speak on these issues? Okay, so seeing none, we'll take those two comments, maybe only one of those, and then we'll go back to those objectives. Russ?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, maybe I missed it, or maybe you guys did this already, but as far as the tags go, has there been any input from the Interstate Tagging Committee? And that's all the experts up and down the coast that do that work, the tagging, and I don't think it's been together for a while, so I don't know if you guys looked into that group to give you some input on the tags or not. So
We haven't directly contacted the Interstate Tagging Committee. We certainly could. I think the Interstate Tagging Committee's expertise runs more to the research aspect of it, so how to design a tagging program that's going to keep fish you release back into the wild alive, et cetera. But we could certainly get in touch with them to talk about any potential ideas that they might have for a successful tag in terms of keeping a fish alive, but also meeting the non-counterfeitability issues.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman? Yeah, and that's where I was getting to, is more the live angle of things and some of the tag retention studies that have been done in the past, and whether or not those tags, and John mentioned a few of them, whether those tags work in the live market. If you have a good tag retention study that shows 50% retention after 3 months or something like that, I think you've got what you need. And those tags, as John said, once they're pulled, they usually you can't use them again.
Okay, good feedback, but potential another avenue. Mike, you wanted to pass? Okay. All right, so staff has brought back up the draft objectives, and again, these are fully itemized in the meeting summary from the Law Enforcement Committee. Is there any feedback from the board on these? Okay, seeing none. So I've heard a lot of furious typing to my right and my left up here, which I assume means we've gotten feedback from the board that we were hoping for today. I'm seeing some nods. Okay. Is there any other business to come before the management board today? Seeing none, Pat Augustine would like to make a motion.
Mr. Chairman, do you have to elect a vice chairman, or did I miss something?
No, that was actually done at the last meeting.
Thank you. It didn't show up on the agenda.
We'll get that document updated, but Mr. Simpson is our vice chair unless he's resigned since his election last.
Motion to adjourn.
Which I'm not. Second by Russ Allen. Without objection, the board is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Hospitality will be in room 933 if you give me 5 minutes to get up there and set it up.